Hello, good evening, and welcome to the program. This is Daily Politics on Trust TV. I am Abdullahi Ahmed. Thank you most kindly for joining us. Tonight on the program, we turn our spotlight to a bombshell report by BudgIT, Nigeria's leading civic, tech and budgetary transparency organization, which has uncovered alleged insertions totaling a staggering 6.9 trillion naira in the 2025 budget by the National Assembly. The report alleges that both chambers of the legislature embedded over 11,000 projects, many of them outside statutory mandate, raising renewed concerns over controversial practice of budget padding, which continues to undermine budget credibility and public trust. While budget padding isn't necessarily a new phenomenon in Nigeria's fiscal system, the scale this year, representing 12.5% of the total budget, has drawn sharp reactions from civic society and economic watchers alike. Now, to help us unpack BudgIT's findings and understand the broader implications for governance and public accountability, we're joined virtually by Oluwatosin Iseniyi, is a research and policy analyst at BudgIT. He's joined us live from Lagos. So, Oluwatosin, good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us on Daily Politics. It's nice to have you. First and foremost, just to clear the air on one particular aspect of this conversation that I believe is very critical for Nigerians to understand. Does BudgIT consider this act illegal? Do we have Mr. Oluwatosin on the line? Mr. Oluwatosin, I don't know if you can hear me. All right, we're going to work on the audio there in just a moment to try to get the thoughts of Mr. Oluwatosin Iseniyi on the program from BudgIT to understand the context of this development, but also just to provide some sort of background information for you on this one. Hello, Mr. Oluwatosin, let's try it again. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you very much.
Great.
I'm having a little bit of connectivity
Yes,
issues.
I just want us to talk about the most obvious question to ask, right? Before we get into the details of what your organization has uncovered. Does your organization consider this act of budget padding or insertions an illegal act?
So we cannot categorically call it illegal per se, because the National Assembly has the power of appropriation. So they have the power to review and make certain adjustments. But when you are indirectly or directly going to benefit from this adjustment, then we see it as criminal. It is corruption. I joined a little bit late, so I do not know if you gave a background to the issue itself. So now we identify over 11,000 insertion by the National Assembly. So this means when the budget was submitted by the executive to the National Assembly for review, the National Assembly, in their power of appropriation, using the power that they have, they decided to add fresh line items of over 11,122. You understand? And these totaling up to the sum of 6.9 trillion naira. Mind you, this is not the first time it is happening. Over the years it has been happening, but it gets worse every year. I think if we narrow down to this to the times where we've been doing this analysis, we'll see that in 2021, about 5,600 line item was identified. We sum up to 913 billion naira in 2021, in the 2021 approved budget by the National Assembly. In 2022, 6,462 line items were also identified as inserted by the National Assembly. In 2024, because in 2023, we decided to move from the conversation of insertion and look more around to see the actual mandate of this ministry, department, and agencies, to see if they have the capacity to carry out this project. So we're like, okay, let's pause. Why is this consistent? Why do they continue carrying out such projects? Why is it that the zonal intervention fund of about 100 billion naira has been exhausted, and the National Assembly thinks that it is right for them to now infiltrate the national budget of the ministry, department, and agencies? we now identify a lot of projects that we know that this guy do not have the capacity to even carry. Then we went back to the conversation of insertion again in 2024. And in 2024, we noticed that about 7,447 new line items was also inserted into the budget of the, of course, the Appropriation Act of 2024, the approved budget. To break the camel's back, it got worse. In 2024, it was about 2.2 trillion naira, 7,447 line item. But in 2025, it was a serious crime, because why would you go as far as, and now imputing about 11,122 line items in the budget, summing to 6.9 trillion naira. Mind you, the budget of the national, the national budget as at 2016 is 6 trillion naira. So imagine that the National Assembly decided to sit down and draft another new budget that happened about 9 years ago. And if you look at these line items, their expenditure that actually don't make any sense. They're expenditures that shouldn't be even involved in by the federal government.
Right.
So how would you make sense of the federal government constructing boreholes? How do you want to make a sense of that? How do you want to, sorry, can you sorry for the noise. How will you explain about, I think, 984 projects worth about 1.7 trillion naira,
right.
Scattered around, no proper explanation. They were just doing insertion. What was about 538? He repeated the same about 538 times. Street lights was about 1,477. These two conversations are not even meant to be handled by the federal government. They are conversations for the local government. So if the federal government even decide to even carry out this project, they are now interfering in the capacity, of the local government. And this is issue of trust. Just recently, we had a conversation around the autonomy of the local government. Is it that you don't trust the local government enough to carry out this project? What are they using their money for?
Right. And
so if you start carrying out the project of
just to break down some of those numbers, you're talking about in terms of the insertion patterns and value distribution, right? Projects valued over 5 billion naira, for instance, there were 238 of them, totaling 3.29 trillion naira. Budget projects that are valued between 1 to 5 billion, about 984 of them. Projects between 500 million to 1 billion, about over 1,000 of them. Projects between 100 to 500 million naira, about 5,800 of them. Less than 10 million naira, there are about 50 of them. And, totaling that 11,000 plus, which gives you a figure of 6.9 trillion naira, about 12% of the 2025 budget. Let me get your understanding of what Nigerians are to make of the federal government's body language. I mean, clearly the executive is not necessarily perturbed by this development because the president has already signed it. Does this suggest that they're all on the same page despite this public outrage?
Honestly, we know why we have separation of powers. To create check and balances. The executive submits to the legislature for final review. And if the legislation passes, that means it's in collaboration with the executive. And if it's not even with the collaboration with the executive, it has been passed. It is not possible for the executive to say that they've not seen these figures. You understand? So it is, I will say that it's either an oversight issue on the part of the executive, or an intentional collaboration with the National Assembly, because it has to make sense. If we look at the situation that we have right now, that we are in right now, in terms of the drop in oil price, we cannot just throw money around. You understand? One of the reasons why we decided to sit down and review the budget holistically is to ensure that we are getting value for money. Because we have limited revenue, we are not going to make, actually, based on oil price drop, we're not going to make up to the estimate that we have. And already we have about 13 trillion naira in deficit. That is for sure. 13 trillion naira in deficit, it means that we are going to look for that money, either through loans or through grants. One way or the other, we need to fund the budget. And there's a deficit of 30 trillion naira. And out of that deficit of 13 trillion naira, about 6 trillion naira already is on frivolities, insertions by the National Assembly. So it is time for us to sit down and now rethink how we even come up with these expenditures themselves. I have issues even with I used to have issues with MDAs, but by the time you engage MDAs will tell you this is not what we submitted. So if you look at it, you will see that these assertions are fresh. What the MDAs submitted to the budget office, and the executive together submit to the National Assembly, it is totally different from what the National Assembly is going to present as final document. So you cannot even hold the MDA responsible for these assertions at the end of the day, because they will tell you that they are not aware that they had submitted a document. So if you just oppose the approved budget to the proposed budget, you will see that they are right.
Right.
So this conversation, it is between the executive, which is the presidency, and the legislature, which is the National Assembly.
Right. And how do you square this cycle between trying to understand whether this is quote unquote legislative overreach or legislative discretion? Because as you did say, the Constitution gives the National Assembly the power of appropriation. And for most of the lawmakers, they will simply say, listen, this is well within our right to do so. I mean, we have the right to appropriate funds. Regardless of what the executive proposes, we do have the right to take a second look and provide some inputs. And as far as they're concerned, these are the inputs that they think will actually add value to the governance process. I mean, does that make sense to you?
I actually want to ask you this question based on your understanding of the duties of the tiers of government that we have. The federal, the state, and the local governments. We're having like a gist right now. Do you think it is the responsibility of the federal government to be building boreholes? Do you think it is the responsibility of the federal government to be building markets, town halls? These are conversations that are supposed to be addressed. Now let's narrow down to the power of the national of the appropriation power of the National Assembly. I think this needs to be properly demystified, because they know they have the power to review the appropriation bill before it is passed as an act, does not give them the autonomy to just insert whatsoever thing they like. I mentioned earlier that it is criminal for you to benefit from public procurement. I am not saying that the money is being given to them directly, but if you look at it, these are projects that are being done across different constituencies and senatorial districts. In one way or the other, they will say it was nominated by them. But note, there is already a provision of 100 billion by the zonal intervention project, which is different. So it is as if you are giving a child 100 naira, but because the 100 naira is not enough for them and they want to do more, so that they want to gain your favor, or they want to gain the favor of their friends, they will now encroach into someone else's purse. If they were a project that has no connection with them, if they were a project that is within the purview of ministry, department, and agencies, we will understand. But they are constituency projects. Constituency project is not by law. It shouldn't be found in the budget of ministry, department, and agencies. It does not make any sense.
Right. And talk to me about, what this fragmentation of some of these projects. You talk about street lights, town halls, Some of them look like intervention programs for skill acquisition and things like that. A lot of people have connected the dot to talk about possible political patronage rather than a strategic infrastructure development plan. Is that what Nigerians can easily infer is happening here, that these are, so some of these projects are domiciled in certain constituencies because that is the arrangement for some of these lawmakers to have them as their constituency project? And if that is the case, what is principally wrong with that?
So, it is unlawful to benefit from public procurement. In fact, it is something that they can be sentenced for. You understand? And if it is being made a norm, because I told you about, I discussed the trend. If it's being made a norm, then there is no need for check and balance anymore. There won't be a need for review. The budget process is going to be bastardized. You understand? Because if you look at certain provisions by law, if you look at the Fiscal Responsibility Act, if you look at policy around public procurement, you will see that a lawmaker or somebody in government should not directly or indirectly benefit from public procurement. You shouldn't have access to a contractor. The contractor should come and bid for it. The project that is being carried out shouldn't be carried out in your name. You shouldn't be able to influence the spending of. When I mean influence the spending of the government for your own good, because by then it loses its value. Because of such issues, that is why I mentioned that zonal intervention project was carved out for them, 100 billion naira for all 469 legislators, 109 senator, and 360 House of Rep members. Why will you go outside your purview and infiltrate somebody's? It's as if I own a farm. I have now exhausted my farm produce and now jump into my neighbor's farm. That is criminal. But because I have the power, probably I have this power, the strength to overshadow my neighbor. You understand? I can now decide to do whatever I want to do in his farm. So even we try to even look at it in the day-to-day lifestyle, it still doesn't make any sense. But because this thing is happening and people are not talking about it, or as it should, because budget has been talking about it since 2021, but people are not talking about it as it should, it becomes a norm. They will be like, "Shay, we did it in 2021, we got away with it. We did it in 2022, we got away with it. We did it in 2024, we got away, and 2025. If we don't talk about it now, it will happen in 2026. Right. And if it happens in 2026, we do not have control over it anymore. It becomes a norm because it's a trend. I mentioned we started this full review in 2021. It has been happening before then. But it's because the numbers were outrageous, and that was why we decided to discuss this. If you look at the total number, what went to the, for example, a ministry like a Ministry of Agriculture that experienced over 1,000% increase in its expenditure. What went to the National Assembly was about 242 billion naira. But when it came out, it's about 1.9 trillion naira. Who gave you the authority to inflate the budgets that way? You don't even have money enough to run the budget. But you just feel like, okay, because you have the power, you are making use of. It is very, very simple.
Right.
It is the misuse of power.
There's quite a lot to unpack, Oluwatosin Iseniyi, but we're going to have to leave it here for now. Another compelling work from Budget. We do appreciate you for joining the conversation tonight. We'll double down, unpack some of these data, and I believe Nigerians would await, what the context is around this conversation of insertions and what it actually means when it comes to budget financing and deliverables in terms of what people can reasonably expect from some of these developments. Thank you so much for joining the conversation tonight. We really appreciate you for the analysis.
A pleasure.
Right, we're going to double down on this, what it means, the politics involved, the governance structure itself, and whether this could actually overwhelm the ability of the executive to implement what appears to be a bloated figure in terms of the 2025 budget, and what the Tinubu administration can reasonably achieve in terms of delivering what is in that appropriation bill. More on that in just a moment. Join us again.